Big, full tower cases have been popular over the last few years amongst enthusiast builders, though I suspect for many, the appeal hasn't been the vast amount of room for expansion. Rather, it's those massive window panels found on cases such as the Corsair Graphite 760T and Cooler Master Cosmos SE, for example. After all, if you can't show off all that gaming gear, what's the point of having it? To the next level recently has been an onslaught of tempered glass cases. I have to admit, they do look pretty, but like most pretty, transparent things, they aren't cheap. So, what is a PC building fanatic to do? Okay, so the situation isn't nearly as bleak as I've made it out to be. There are literally hundreds of affordable mid-tower options available, and yet none of them look anything like the one I have here today. The new Thermaltake View 27 case offers onlookers a bird's eye view of the build thanks to what I've dubbed the Billionaire's case door in my recent unboxing video. Essentially, what we have here is a large gull-wing window panel that continuously spans the entire left side and top of the case. Thermaltake have already shown off a few very cool looking custom hardpipe liquid cool setups in the View 27. I suspect this will be a very attractive case for modders and tweakers, much like the Core P3 we recently played around with. For the most part, the View 27 does favour form over function, and this is most prominent when looking at that curved window panel. As the window does cover much of the side and top of the case, it means ventilation has been sacrificed here. To overcome this lack of ventilation, Thermaltake has been forced to include as much front intake and rear exhaust ventilation as possible. Again, it is a case of form over function, as the added front ventilation means the external drive bays have been left out. That said, this has afforded Thermaltake the luxury of offering support for large front-mounted radiators measuring up to 360mm. Of course, this means you can also install a trio of 120mm fans up front as well, which you'll need to do as the case comes with no front-mounted fans. Additionally, it is possible to install a 120mm fan in the bottom of the case. Included out of the box is a single pre-installed rear 120mm fan. Externally, the View 27 looks pretty good, particularly for a budget case. From the front, we find a tinted panel which looks very impressive with a few LED fans installed behind it, very reminiscent of the Inwinator 5 it has to be said. Above that is a basic I/O panel offering just a single USB 3 port, two USB 2 ports, audio jacks along with power and reset buttons. Ventilation is featured on either side of the front plastic panel, and I like how the edges of the case have been given a bullnose finish, which is pretty sleek. Removing the panel, we find a large removable dust filter along with filters down either side of the panel. It's a pretty low budget affair, but it will do the job. Around the back we find a fairly typical layout. The only oddity here are two vertically mounted expansion slots, and I'll get to those shortly. There are 6 thumb screws, 2 holding in the right hand panel with 4 securing the left/top panel. Underneath we find feet that are more like rails, keeping the case up off the ground. There also looks to be access for securing an internal 2.5-inch storage drive. Inside, everything's very easy to access, largely thanks to that gull-wing door. In the main chamber, we find the motherboard tray, which supports standard ATX boards. Along with a good number of cable management holes, there are mounting locations for 3 2.5-inch drives, along with a 4th on the rear side. Then, hidden in the bottom of the case are 2 3.5-inch plastic drive cages. In total, there are 10 expansion slots, which is a huge amount for a mid-tower. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 extra vertically mounted brackets, which are used to vertically mount the graphics card. This allows gamers to better show off their AMD or Nvidia card. Unfortunately, the required rise cable isn't included in the package, but can be purchased separately for a rather costly 35 Aussie or 30 US. Regardless of how you mount the graphics card, there's room for cards as long as 410mm without the front fan installed. So in short, you won't have an issue installing even the biggest of gaming graphics cards. While on the subject of clearance, it's possible to squeeze in a 155mm tall CPU cooler and a 180mm long power supply. That's some pretty impressive hardware support for an ATX case, given it measures just 508mm tall, 479mm deep, and just 201mm wide. For a steel and plastic built case, the View 27 weighs a very reasonable 6.4 kilos. The aesthetics might have taken a priority outside, but inside, the View 27 is all business. Building inside the View 27 is about as easy as it gets, especially if you're keen on putting together a clean build. The separate basement area really helps here, allowing any excess cables to be tucked away. The tool-free design also helps make installation a breeze. I tried a few different hardware configurations inside the View 27 and I didn't run into any issues. Again, this is a budget case, so things like rubber grommets on the cable management holes are missing, and the steel is a bit thinner than you might find in more expensive models. Still, the layout and design is excellent. There's also just a single 120mm fan, which I have to admit is a bit disappointing. Even at this price, I would have liked a second one up front, particularly given the PCIe rise cable isn't included. The only other concern with this case is its key feature, the plexiglass window. These things are a serious dust magnet, and unless you have the softest of cloths, cleaning them often leads to mass scuffing. Keeping cheap plexiglass windows looking new is next to impossible, and this is the very reason why the industry is shifting to tempered glass. On a side note, the gold wing panel is quite difficult to remove and then reinstall, but I guess you shouldn't be doing that too often. At this point, I don't have a standard hardware configuration I use for testing case thermals and noise. The View 27 only comes with a single fan anyway, so results are going to vary depending on how you configure it. Despite the unusual design, there's room for a decent amount of cooling upgrades, so boosting airflow won't be an issue. Still, I keep coming back to one thing in my mind, the price. At just $90 Australian, the Thermaltake View 27 isn't exactly expensive for a case of this calibre. To this day, I still maintain that the Deepcool Tesseract SW is the best value mid-tower money can buy, and at $60 it's still a good bit cheaper, but certainly doesn't offer the unique design of the View 27. For similar money, we find the Inwin 503 and Silverstone Redline, both nice cases in their own right, but neither for me have the wow factor of the View 27. What do you guys think of the gull wing door? Let me know in the comments. I'm your host Matt as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers guys for joining me for another episode of Hardware Unboxed. To those of you that already support the channel, thank you so much, it's truly appreciated. And to those of you that would like to support the channel directly, I do have Amazon links and a Patreon link in the video description below. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.